Thank you for being here. My name is Chris Dempsey. I'm a town meeting member and former chair of the Brookline Transportation Board, and I'm honored to be moderating tonight's public forum on the Washington Street redesign. I want to start by thanking the League of Women Voters, which has sponsored this event and done all of the organization around it. In particular, I want to thank Diana McClure, Ernie Frey, and of course, Felina Silver Robinson, who was really the force behind this effort. Let's give them all a round of applause and thank them for their volunteerism. The League is such a vital institution in Brookline, and I know that they want to remind you that early voting has already started. So if you want to start voting, there are very cool I voted stickers this year that feature a Brookline turkey. So that's your special prize for voting. I'm guessing I don't have to tell this particular audience to vote. You would not be showing up at this particular forum if you weren't already very civically engaged. But we also have folks who will be watching the recording, and I do want to encourage everybody to get out there and weigh in on the election. So as I said, my role tonight is to MC the event and to support a robust and informative conversation and to make sure that all of the perspectives on this project feel heard and respected. And the League has done a great job of pulling together a diverse set of voices on this project, and everyone's going to get a chance to weigh in tonight. Here's how our forum will go. I'm first going to start with Commissioner Shute, the Department of Public Works head, who's going to provide an introduction to the project and context and timeline for a decision. Then we'll have a 20-minute overview of the project, up to 20 minutes, presented by the project consultants, Ty and Bond. Then we'll have up to an additional 5 minutes from Amy Ingalls, the town's transportation administrator, discussing pedestrian safety, accessibility, and other issues on the project. Then we'll enter our portion of the evening that I call the Davids section, because we have David Lashinsky, David Krupp, and David Gladstone, who will go one after another to talk about their perspective on the project. Then we'll have a moderated discussion where I ask some questions of the participants, and then you all have a chance to weigh in and ask some questions of the panelists. And I should say questions are more important than weighing in at this stage. So I'll remind you that questions end with a question mark. And then we'll conclude with just 5 minutes of thank yous and acknowledgements. As I mentioned, this forum is being recorded, and thank you to the Brookline Interactive Group for making that possible. I want to acknowledge also just the many stakeholders who are involved in this project. I see Select Board Chair Green is here. Select Board Chair Green, thank you for being here, Bernard, and for your service. Would any town meeting members in the audience raise their hands? We almost have a quorum, it looks like, of town meeting. I'm not going to play the role of Neil Wyshynski tonight, but thank you for your engagement. I know that there are also some members of the Design Review Committee here. Anyone who's on the Design Review Committee, please raise your hand. A couple of folks as well, thank you for your service. That's Design Review Committee for this particular project. They've been very engaged and great volunteers on that. More public engagement on this project is going to lead to a better outcome. That's why tonight's forum is so important and why I encourage all of you to continue to engage, to weigh in with your town meeting members, to weigh in with the Transportation Board, with the Select Board, with Commissioner Shute and her team, because that's how we're going to get the right project for Brookline. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Commissioner Shute to provide an introduction to this project. Commissioner Shute has been the Commissioner of Public Works in Brookline since 2020, where she oversees roads, sanitation, transportation planning and administration, parks and open space, water and sewer, and sustainability. If it's happening on the public way in Brookline, Commissioner Shute knows about it. And she is someone who gets into the details on things. Most of you know that before she was commissioner, she was the director of Parks and Recreation in Brookline, where she had just incredible touches on projects that she oversaw. I'll give you my favorite example, which are the Adirondack chairs in Emerson Gardens. Just a wonderful place to sit. And as someone who lived through the pandemic in Brookline Village and did not have outdoor space, that was our refuge. And so thank you, Commissioner, for those Adirondack chairs and for so many other details that you have made possible in our parks and in our streets over the years. The Commissioner has a master's degree in civil and environmental engineering from Tufts University and a bachelor's degree in political science and Spanish from Boston College. In my day job, I work with commissioners of public works around the state and around the country, and I can tell you that Erin is one of the best. So without further ado, Commissioner Shute, I welcome you to introduce this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So welcome all of you this evening. Thank you to the League of Women Voters. Really appreciate this forum where we can talk about the Washington Street Complete Street Rehabilitation Project. When I was speaking with the League about kind of the forum and the format and what would be most helpful, we really decided that to talk, sort of step back for a little bit. What are the goals and objectives of the project? What does the process look like? Where can people get more information? How can they contribute? So to provide that information and then to provide an overview of the project and then start to get some feedback both with the panelists who will share their respective opinions. All of them have been involved in the process to date, and then also from all of you and your constituents. With that, in talking about the Washington Street project, the primary goal of this project is not only to rehabilitate a critical arterial roadway that is in poor condition, but to create a true complete street throughout the entire corridor. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that is. But Washington Street, as many of you know, it's an important connection between Route 9, Boylston Street, and Beacon Street. It is utilized by high volumes of drivers, pedestrians, cyclists, and provides access to 3 commercial districts, public safety facilities, the courthouse, schools, other town government services, including the library and town hall. So our sort of overarching goals with this project, and some of these have even evolved over time. I think about the Adirondack chairs, and some of these details in my experience, and I've been with Brookline now 26 years, is it's the design review process that really helps shape our ultimate, our ultimate outcomes. And I actually think the Adirondack chairs is something that came from the neighborhood and the community, and we figured out how to incorporate those, and there was some discussion around that. So even with Washington Street, this design has evolved so much since the very beginning when we said, okay, sort of here's the footprint and what it looks like, and we're designing this with the community. So it has been an iterative process and a lot of back and forth. Our goals for this project are to better accommodate all users, to calm traffic, provide safer crossings, separate users to the extent practicable, improve accessibility, and when we talk about accessibility, we mean signals, sidewalks, curb ramps, enhance the streetscape. This is going to mean some tree removal to accommodate all users and also tree planting, new green and public spaces, pedestrian scale lighting. We're clearly maintaining emergency access along the corridor and enhancing commercial vitality. And in terms of sort of some of the foundation of what's guiding our design is there are community objectives, and we're sort of following these. These are the town's policies, the plans, our practices, and federal and state requirements. These are the foundational elements. These are our starting point for the design, and then it's being developed, as I mentioned, through the process. We're designing the corridor to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Massachusetts Architectural Access Board. The town has a complete streets policy that was voted by the Select Board in 2016 that considers the safety, comfort, and convenience of all users. It looks at roadway geometry, traffic speed and volume, crash summaries, sidewalks and curb ramps, among many other factors. We're also incorporating the town's traffic calming policy, green routes network plan. That's the bicycle network plan that has been revisited each year and recently updated by our Bicycle Advisory Committee. The Urban Forest Climate Resiliency Master Plan, traffic signal and pedestrian corridor reports, and walk signal reports. These are all considerations in design, and we bring this as sort of the foundation of the plan and then bring it to you, the community, and get feedback. And we've been getting lots of feedback that has really modified the plan to date. I want to talk a little bit about that, the community engagement. So a design review committee was established by the Transportation Board. It is a 12-person design review committee. We have had 8 public meetings. We've had 8 public design review committee meetings. We also had a site walk that ran the full extent of the corridor. We're going to have another public meeting. We haven't set the date, but it'll be sometime in early December. And we're also presenting to the select board just sort of a status update next Tuesday with a lot of probably what you're going to see tonight. The design review committee, their job is to work with the neighborhood, with the businesses, with all interested parties, and recommend and ultimately vote on a 25% concept plan. That plan will then go to the Transportation Board, who will vote on that plan, and then it'll go to the Select Board. And from there, we'll submit it to the DOT and kind of start through their process. So we still have a ways to go. The Design Review Committee includes members from the Transportation Board, Pedestrian Advisory Committee, Commission on Disability, Bike Advisory Committee, Shared Mobility Committee, the Pearson Driscoll Safe Routes to School representatives, Brookline Village and Washington Square merchant representatives, Washington Street abutter, and the Council on Aging. But I want to say, while we have this, I think, robust design review committee, the meetings have been open to all participants' participation, and we also certainly we get feedback at the meetings, but we've also received a lot in terms of letters and emails, both through the portal or to staff. And all of those have been shared with the design review committee and with our consultants. So we're getting feedback from in multiple ways. We do have a project website. We'll share that at the end so that you know how to communicate with us through this process. But you can also always reach out to me and to our staff, because we're happy to talk with you about the project and share your feedback with the right people so that we continue to evolve with the design. So I'm going to introduce you to our consultant team from Ty and Bond. I'll let Chris and Rich introduce themselves briefly. But we've been working with them. They are experts, not only at traffic design and kind of incorporating all of these different components into ultimately what is going to be a transformative project for Brookline. But they really know how to work through the Massachusetts DOT TIP project. This project is currently valued at $28 million, and it's in federal fiscal year 28 and 29. So it's spread over 2 years. We probably see it going out to bid, barring any other changes in federal fiscal year 28, and we'll see kind of. Then we will just continue. I don't know the extent of the duration of the project yet. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rich.
And Rich and Chris, I am going to try to keep you to 20 minutes here, so I'll give you a warning at 15 minutes when you have 5 minutes left, and then 1 minute when you have 1 minute left.
Okay, that's great. I figured we'd be here till, 11:30?
Yeah.
So thank you, Commissioner. First of all, I do want to say that this is quite a treat to actually be in an audience with folks as opposed to doing a virtual meeting. So so glad you're all here tonight to listen to what we have to say about the project and answer your questions and that sort of thing. So again, my name is Rich Benevento. I'm a Senior Vice President at Ty and Bond. I'm with Chris Surrett. Chris is highway engineer and has been spearheading the effort. And I'm also here with another colleague from Ty and Bond, Alan Cloutier. Alan is a professional traffic engineer. So we've been involved with the project for quite some time, and we're going to talk a little bit about tonight and then answer some of your questions, and I'll try and move quickly. So the Commissioner mentioned complete streets. So what is a complete street? A complete street really is to provide safe, efficient travel for all users. And the Commissioner mentioned that Brookline has a complete streets policy, but any project that we use federal and state funding, it has to comply with Massachusetts healthy transportation policies, which essentially is complete streets. So it's accommodating all users, vehicles, pedestrians, transit, and bicycles. And so you'll see what are some of the things that we're doing. So shorter crossing distances, for example, for pedestrians. We want to accommodate those pedestrians. We want to provide transit improvements, whether it's bus shelters and things like that. We want to provide bicycle accommodation. All of these things at the same time accommodating the traffic that's on Washington Street. We know there's a significant amount of traffic there. We want to create opportunities for things like green space and placemaking and those sorts of things. Because when we go through the design, we're going to determine that, geez, we added some bump outs at a particular street to shorten that crossing distance. In doing so, we created some opportunities for green space. So things like that. Those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. And also to create make Washington Street a destination as opposed to someone who's just trying to get from Route 9 to Boston, across Beacon Street. Reclaiming Washington Street as a town asset, as opposed to just something that people are just sort of driving through. And there's a lot of things on Washington Street, as we know, police station, library, schools, town hall, all of those things. How do we make these easier to access and safe? So the commissioner talked about TIP funding, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about that very quickly, and then Chris is going to get into some of the design aspects of the project. So the TIP process is federal and state funding. 80% of the funding for the $28 million the commissioner mentioned, 80% of that comes from the federal government, and 20% of it comes from the state. This project is programmed on the TIP. There are cities and towns throughout the Commonwealth, they're all vying for those TIP dollars. Brookline is very fortunate that this project is actually programmed on the TIP. A lot of projects, they're hoping to be programmed on the TIP. This one is programmed onto the TIP. The municipality, what's their stake in it? They're responsible for design, they're responsible for permitting, and they're responsible for right-of-way costs. And so, essentially, the town is designing the project, certainly in concurrence with Mass DOT. Because we're using state and federal dollars, we have to comply with their design requirements. And there are some things that they are very stringent on, and there's other things that gives the town a lot of flexibility, and then there's some things that you negotiate, right? You negotiate with them. The design review process, very, very detailed. 25, 75, 100%, and you see PS&E, that means plan, specs, and estimates. Those are all design phases that have to be submitted, and they get submitted to not only Mass DOT in Boston at 10 Park Plaza, where they have the highway design group looking at it, the traffic group, environmental group, landscape architecture, whole group, cadre of folks that look at this in Boston, but then it also goes to the District 6 office, and they look at it, and those same groups of people look at it and go through that design. Very, very detailed review. The 25% preliminary design is capped off with an official Mass DOT design public hearing. It'll probably be in this room, if I had to guess. The town hosts the meeting, but it's conducted by Mass DOT. They have a verbatim transcript of the meeting. And again, very formalized process. One of the things that we're doing right now is having, as the commissioner mentioned, a lot of public engagement. We want to hear input, so we're tailoring the project to the needs of the community, so that when Mass DOT comes in with their design public hearing, essentially what we're saying is we're anxious to get this project going, right? And we've gone through all of those steps. To be advertised for the project, and you'll see that it has to, obviously the design has to be approved by Mass DOT. You have to have a secure right-of-way. This project will require temporary easements and things like that. You have to have all the permits in place to complete the project, and of course, as we mentioned, the project has to be programmed on the statewide transportation improvement program. Once all those things are done, the project advances. The commissioner mentioned this is on the 28 tip. The project could be advertised as early as the fall of 27 because it's a federal fiscal year, which begins October 1st. So it's not really too far away that we could actually start to see these improvements take place. The biggest part of this right now is to get through this design process and to ensure that the project is meeting the needs of the community, that we're addressing as many of those interests as possible. And we know through the design review committee meetings that we've had, there are a lot of interests. Cyclists, parking for the businesses and so forth, as well as accommodating the vehicles and cyclists and all of that. So I'm going to let Chris get into some of this stuff right now, and then we'll be able to answer some questions.
Thank you, Rich. Good evening, everybody. I echo Rich's thoughts. It's nice to see you all in person tonight. So thank you for having us. And I'm going to go through I think the commissioner and Rich went through and sort of set the table on a macroscopic level, talking about project overview, sort of the tip process. I'm going to get into some of the design details now with our remaining time here. So just to establish a baseline, project limits.
Chris, I can hear you pretty well, but just move the mic a little bit more in front of your face for the folks who are going to hear the recording. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Just to start a baseline, just to establish project limits, this project starts at Beacon Street, moves along Washington Street into Brookline Village, and it terminates at Station Street. It includes all of the intersections, minor intersections, major intersections within the upper and lower limits of the project, as you see here on the aerial image. Existing conditions, this is an urban minor arterial of local and regional significance. As the commissioner alluded to, it's a home or a route to 3 main commercial districts and 2 schools. Municipal buildings are on the corridor, located on or in general vicinity of the corridor. So it's a really vital transportation hub for residents, businesses, and commuter traffic in and through Brookline. It is the route of the MBTA buses, the Route 65, and a small portion of the Route 66 bus. So that really exacerbates the needs for transit amenities and operational improvements along the corridor. There's inconsistent and inadequate bicycle accommodations in present day. We do have seasonal blue bike stations around the corridor. I think there's one at least in Brookline Village. And then here at the bottom, the varied sidewalk condition and width. I would say both of those are keywords, condition and width. We have a lack of ADA compliant ramps and slopes, and in some areas the curb reveal is minimal if there is any, and that's because of multiple overlays or degradation of the curbs and sidewalks. So we've really identified a lot of the issues along the corridor. So what are we looking to do to address that? We're looking to do a full depth roadway reconstruction. So that's replacing the roadway pavement, substructure materials, improve intersections, so safer geometry with smaller curb radii and curb extensions, new traffic signals at signalized intersections. Crosswalks at side streets will be raised. We've heard a lot of positive feedback on that through the process thus far. Crosswalks with rapid flashing beacons at non-signalized crosswalks along the corridor. New cement concrete sidewalks and pedestrian curb ramps. And then obviously I said that there's a MBTA route. So we look to improve operations and also amenities. So route being operational improvements with bus pull-off, bus stops, but also amenities such as bus stops and gathering areas for at locations where the buses are signed to stop. Utility upgrades. You see National Grid is currently updating the infrastructure along the corridor. This project will have some modifications to the drainage system, and that's usually in line with a lot of our curb work and curb extensions. And the intersections with signals will be upgraded to modern signal technology. And we look to, as I say, I always joke that signals are like computers. You put them in, they're obsolete. So any new traffic signal technology really helps with the operations of a corridor and of an intersection. So modern technology is far superior than what's out there currently. Design challenges. I would say the biggest one here is, and why it's first, is the right-of-way width. It's 60 feet. So back of sidewalk to back of sidewalk, if you look at that envelope, project that envelope down Washington Street, we have 60 feet of width to work with. So what can we get in 60 feet, right? We have a lot of constraints along the corridor, whether that be trees, amenities, cyclists, and obstructions. So we have 60 feet to work with. That's our template. Competing interests. We want to improve traffic operations. We have to accommodate the MBTA bus routes and improve operations and efficiencies. We have to include on-street parking along the corridor and address pedestrian and cyclist demands in and around the Washington Street area. Utility coordination, another design challenge. You see utilities are out there now. Washington Street is a beautiful corridor. It's because you don't see any utilities in the air. So that means everything is underground. So when we get into the design, you see that. It's really an unrecognized challenge because you don't see it. But when you open the ground and you see, scientifically, spaghetti underneath the ground with all of the utilities, it becomes a major design challenge for us. Protecting the existing tree canopy, critical element to the corridor, gives it the characteristics of the corridor. We want to protect that by all means. And then also, the last one here is the density of adjacent buildings and driveways. It's a dense corridor, a lot of residential driveways, commercial buildings. We have to take that into consideration when we do our layout, our grading, and that becomes a challenge for us in these urban dense corridors such as Washington Street. So visualization, the next few slides here, these graphics really try to project the cross-section that we're looking to achieve here along the corridor. These are just generalized cross-sections. So this is what our ideal section looks like. 2 11-foot travel lanes, 1 in each direction, a 7-foot parking lane. So all those 3 things are in the roadway. Off of the roadway, we're looking for separated bicycle lanes at a 5-foot width. There's a tree belt on each side between the bicycle lane and the sidewalk. So you really, if you visualize the corridor now, you look at the existing tree line. If you project down the existing tree line, you would maintain the sidewalk on the businesses or the residential side of the tree line, and just on the inside or the roadway side of the tree line is where your separated bicycle lane would be. So when we had the site walk 2 weeks ago at this point, to be out there and to visualize what these improvements will look like and what the cross-section looks like based on where we're standing on the ground was very helpful. So this cross-section really represents what our typical section on sort of the non-intersection pieces of the corridor would look like. This is one iteration. The next iteration is just the inverse with the parking on the other side. So really, it's a combination of these two is what our ideal cross-section would look like. 11-foot travel lanes, parking lane, and then the 5-foot separated bicycle lane with the sidewalk at the back or along the property lines. This is a nice overview of the corridor. So sometimes, even myself as an engineer, to look at a plan and sort of decipher what it looks like in black and white is very challenging. So we put together some graphics here. This is more of an aerial view of what the corridor looks like, but it really provides context of where the existing trees are, what the proposed cross-section could look like along this corridor, taking into consideration an aerial perspective of Washington Street, utilizing our proposed design as an overlay. And the next couple slides here are just a review of some of the corridor segments that we've discussed or we're getting to a consensus with the DRC, the Design Review Committee. So we have, we're going to talk about the Washington and Beacon Street intersection, talk about Park Street, and talk about the School and Cypress Street intersections. So the first one is the intersection or sort of the corridor segment at Beacon Street. So at the last DRC meeting, we heard a lot of support for having the single lane approaching Beacon Street on Washington Street. Under this configuration, it does provide us some on-street parking in the commercial area. You could see here, we've highlighted that area on the, say north is up, so on the southern side of Washington Street, we've highlighted that area for on-street parking. This was a big discussion point at previous DRC meetings about having parking in this area to maintain parking in this commercial area at Beacon Street. So we do have the 1 lane approaching Beacon Street, but we are not working within the Beacon Street intersection itself. So the 2 lanes, the lane configuration that's adjacent to the tracks or in between the tracks, that stays the same. Our limits are really what's shown on the screen here. So there was some confusion originally as we were going through some of the alternatives, but you can see here we have the 1 lane approaching Beacon Street, and then the existing condition would remain at the track crossing. So you can still make the left onto Beacon Street as you get through this intersection. The next area that we want to just touch on is the Park Street intersection. Again, through the Design Review Committee process, especially at the meeting, I think it was last week, we had some really productive conversations about this intersection and what the configuration and lane assignments are or can be at this intersection. So the configuration shown here is the single lane approach in each direction. This does still provide the ability to take a left turn on Park Street coming from Beacon Street. We just do not have that separate left turn lane. So by removing that dedicated left turn lane, we can still take the left turn. It's just that you'll be within the through traffic. By having that additional space, it gains storage space, it gains maneuverability for other modes of transportation at this intersection, whether that be pedestrians or cyclists utilizing the Park Street intersection, because we did hear a lot of feedback as Park Street being a big connectivity, a big connector for cyclists and pedestrians. So we wanted to make sure that everyone has the ability to get to Park Street from Washington Street safely, including cyclists and pedestrians.
Chris, 5-minute warning.
Great. Thank you. And then here at School and Cypress Street, again, we heard a lot of positive feedback from the DRC committee. We presented this alternative either the last meeting or the meeting before, but this is really the alternate configuration that we proposed at Washington Street. It helps with some of the geometric deficiencies of what's out there. It really realigns the existing intersection. It shortens pedestrian crossings within the intersection. It's a much cleaner intersection and a much more well-defined intersection. And it also really creates, if you look at the bottom right here, it really creates a potential placemaking area. We just highlighted it in green, but we're not at the point now where we could say what we want to do with that area, but it really does provide a great opportunity to reuse some of that space that would be gaining back by realigning the intersection. So this is the alternate intersection alignment. And then proposed schedule moving forward. The commissioner mentioned that we'll have an upcoming DRC meeting, date yet to be determined, in December. Once we get through the design review committee, we'll seek approvals through the design review committee and the transportation board. That will then go to the select board. Once we get that and we enter the Mass DOT process, Rich did a great job sort of outlining what the requirements are and what the milestones are with Mass DOT. Once that process is complete, it will get advertised and then construction will begin. Opportunities to participate, public comments are always encouraged. We do have our next DRC meeting in December of 2024. We have the project website here, washingtonstbrookline.com, our email address, very active engagement through the community email address, and we also have the Brookline DPW website at the bottom of this slide as well.
Yeah, if Chris is done, Commissioner, do you want to use
just I think
time?
one
Yep.
one piece is at the last meeting we went all the way through Brookline Village, and you don't see that here. You don't see all of the segments. Sort of they're on our slide deck and on our website. You can see sort of the full expanse from Beacon Street to Station Street. Right now, we have some different concepts for Brookline Village. With the original plan, there was 0 parking in Brookline Village. That it was all taken out between sort of, it gets very narrow. And this was really from Holden Street to Station Street. There were a few spaces that were put back. And the feedback from the businesses was very clear and reasonable. We need parking, we need loading to stay in business. And so the design team, we gave them the direction. We said, go all the way back of curb, design what you can. That's going to mean some tree removal and where we can put back trees. And so the latest designs puts parking back on one side of the street and then still has the bike pedestrian accommodations. So, and it also has some options for what that intersection might look like with kind of a new geometry. So that's online. I actually didn't know it was missing. So I don't want anyone to think like we were just missing Brookline Village as we move into our discussions.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. So next in our agenda here is Transportation Administrator Amy Ingalls. Amy joined Brookline in April of 2023, and she works very closely in this role with Dan Murphy, who I see in the front row, who's the Director of Engineering and Transportation. Before this role in Brookline, Amy was a transportation engineer in the city of Medford. And so please welcome Amy. And Amy, you have up to 5 minutes to add on to anything that you want to the tie and bond presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris and Chris. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for hosting this meeting, to the League of Women Voters and all of you for coming. So I just kind of wanted to drill down a little bit closer on some of the pedestrian safety improvements that we're proposing, because I think some of that stuff tends to get overshadowed in some of the trade-off conversations we've had about bikes and about parking and saving trees. But there's really a lot of pedestrian improvements that we are proposing here that will help everyone. We're all pedestrian at some point, right? So I just want to kind of highlight some of those a little bit more. So currently, what's out there, like Chris said, there's a lot of the intersections have very long crossings. Some of them are spread out pretty far between even the side streets that do have mid-block crossings. There's just not enough crosswalks, not enough close-spaced crosswalks. There's uneven and cracked sidewalks. We have our beautiful tree canopy, of course, but sometimes that causes the sidewalks to heave, and that could be a tripping hazard. So There's a lot of sidewalk repair that needs to be done, and actually will be reconstructed. Vehicle speeds are high. I think they're lower than maybe they were a few years ago, due to some kind of interim changes that we've done, but they're still higher than they need to be, and there's a crash history that kind of goes along with that. At the signalized intersections, there's operational deficiencies that cause delay for all users, including pedestrians. Pedestrians have to wait for quite a long time to cross the street, particularly at the Village and at the intersection with School and Cypress. The sidewalks themselves, as well as a lot of the curb ramps, do not meet compliance for ADA standards, so folks with disabilities have a hard time using those. And then the bus stops. This is a big one that I think doesn't get quite mentioned enough, is just that, Chris mentioned that there's a very popular bus route that goes down Washington Street, and there are numerous existing bus stops, but I don't think any of them actually comply with current MBTA standards. And so parts of this project are going to be upgrading those so that they do, and that they function better. So we'll get into some of those recommendations here, or improvements here. So I mentioned the sidewalks. This is going to be a full reconstruction of the entire right-of-way of Washington Street, and that's not just the street itself, that's the sidewalks as well. So from the back of sidewalk, which is basically, on this screen here, from that wall to the other wall on the other side, all of that's going to get reconstructed, so brand new sidewalks. The side streets are all going to get crosswalks. There's some that do now across Washington Street, but some that don't. Every single one of them is going to have an RRFB. Those are the ones where you push the button and the lights flash. They're going to have the high visibility crosswalks. Some of them will have bump outs. There'll already be shortened crossings because of the raised bike lane, but they may have an additional bump out like this intersection you can see here. And I already mentioned the ADA compliant curb ramps. So crossing the street, whether it's crossing a side street or the main line, will be much easier and safer for everyone. At those side streets, there's several, I'm sure that you all know about, that have just a very long crossing and a wide swath of pavement. So we're going to tighten some of those corridors, which will create some interesting public space that could be used in a number of different ways. This one happens to be near a bus stop, so maybe there's additional shelter space, tree plantings, benches, different things like that. It drastically shortens the crossing and the exposure that pedestrians have when they make that crossing. But it also reduces the speed of a turning vehicle by tightening that radius. So vehicles are much more likely to see the person crossing and yield to them. And so, yeah, I mentioned the intersections. This intersection we're looking at here at School and Cypress is complicated. It kind of comes in at weird angles. It can be confusing sometimes, especially for people who haven't driven through or walked through or biked through before. The sight lines aren't great, especially for making left turns from Washington Street. I mentioned the delay. There's a lot of problems with this intersection, so I'm very excited about the things we're proposing to change that. So this is basically the same thing that Chris had just showed you here, proposal to turn this into kind of two different intersections and deal with some of these odd angles that the streets come in on, and really just simplify things and make it look more like an intersection that we're all used to. It actually happens to, because of this kind of reorganization, it happens to make the signal function much better. So there's much less delay for everyone, regardless of mode. The sight lines are better. You can see you can see oncoming traffic better when you're making a turn. You can see pedestrians when you're turning and across a crosswalk. The crossings are much shorter. It's all just simpler and easier to understand, and just much more pleasant.
Amy, you're at 5 minutes, so I'm going to ask you to wrap up.
Yep, no problem. And then the bus stops. So like I said, the bus stops currently don't meet MBTA standards. We are going to bring them to those standards, and we're also going to make it so that buses don't have to pull over to get to that bus stop. They're going to stop in the lane, and that greatly reduces the time that it's going to take for them to serve that bus stop. So again, improving operations and safety for everybody.
Great. Thank you, Amy. So now we get to the Davids portion of the evening, and I'm going to welcome David Lashinsky to the conversation for up to 5 minutes. David owns Eureka in Coolidge Corner, which many of you know, one of our wonderful small businesses in Brookline. And like many of our retail stores in Brookline, it's really more than just a store. It's a place that creates community with game nights and after-school programs. During the pandemic, I think you completed a 40,000 piece puzzle. I saw that, and that takes a village.
Personally, but all of our customers did.
Well, that's exactly my point, is that it's a community there. And in addition to that, David is also the longtime head of the Coolidge Corner Merchants Association. So his voice is not just his own, but really that of many others in Brookline's small business community. So David, welcome to this conversation. You have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and also thank you to the League of Women Voters for giving us the opportunity to further explore this particular issue and what it means. First question I have for you, Chris, is would you rather I sit here or should I go up to the podium?
It's up to you. Do you have slides to present?
I have no slides to present.
So as long as you're comfortable there, it's probably efficient for you to stay there if that is okay.
Especially if you're counting those 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's right.
So I'm speaking today, though, not with my hat on of the focus on business of the Coolidge Corner Merchants Association or as part of the Small Business Committee, but rather I'm also a resident of Washington Street, a longtime homeowner. I actually witnessed the introduction of the streetlight when it was first introduced to our house. Do you guys remember, who was it, Alan Funk? Or one of the TV shows where they would show you all these, people all of a sudden doing strange things. Well, I felt like that when they were putting the street light up, and they were testing it out, and we'd be looking at our living room window and be turning, red or green right in front of us. And I said, gee, what can we do with this? But I didn't go over so well with my family. However, so what I am speaking about, though, is what I want to do today is, or at least from my remarks, is focus much more on life on Washington Street from a residential perspective. So I'm going to bring that to bear. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions on the business side, but the David to my right, to your left, will be talking more about the business side, because that is, as you all know, near and dear to my heart. I think that the work that was done for the design committee was admirable, and it took clearly a lot of effort to get here. The very significant concerns, however, and I was listening through the presentations, is that I kept hearing phrases about making it easier and safer for pedestrians and for cyclists multiple times. Maybe once I have heard something about automobile traffic. Now, I can tell you from living, how many here, by the way, live on Washington Street? Okay, so Washington Street is a hubbub of activity. No picture up here actually represented it. There are cars going back and forth all hours of the day and night. Fire engines are screaming by constantly. Police vehicles are coming by. You have ambulances coming by. You have traffic coming by. We are frequently inundated with lines, especially around school openings and closings in both directions. It's almost gridlock. Before the street light was installed, we had to call the police about every 2 weeks with another serious accident that happened because somebody didn't stop. So I'm quite familiar with the patterns and the things that go on. My concern about the design as it stands now is that none of that activity is reflected in that design. The pictures all look bucolic. They were wonderful. But it also looked like I was someplace out in western Massachusetts where there was little traffic and little going on. You talked about raising the sidewalks and making them actually look more, much more elevated and easier to walk with. But there's about 50 at least 50 different cutouts for driveways. So does that mean that everyone is going to have to repave their driveways now to be able to get from the street into their driveway? And what happens if you can't then fit into the garage if your driveway is higher? Or instead, are the sidewalks going to be just going up and down and up and down and up and down on a wave pattern, which is great if I'm at a skateboard, arena or a park, but that's not where I am. And I want to say, by the way, I'm not anti-bike. I love to bike. I taught my family how to bike, but not on Washington Street. However, I'm also very aware of the need to have an efficient way of dealing with all of the traffic and all of the cars and all of the vehicles in a way that reflects actual life. This plan does not reflect actual life. Talking about saying, I'm now going to have a bus stop in the travel lane, extend out a ramp so I can have people getting on and off more easily is admirable, except it's in the travel lane. There are already cars being backed up, due to the traffic trying to get through, and the buses pull over. Now they're going to be in the middle of the street. What we're inviting is basically a continual gridlock on the entire length of Washington Street and all the side streets coming into it. This is going to make the quality of life and living on this street worse for everyone and less safe for everyone. I don't think it's the way to go. I think there's other ways of dealing with this. Or put it this way, I think there must be other ways of dealing with it, and we don't have to simply accept something that is much more oriented to throughput of fewer people than cars or pedestrians and cyclists than automobiles.
David, you're over 5 minutes, so that might be a good place to conclude.
Yeah, that sounds great, because I will stop now, and then thank you very much. I can come back for the rest of it later.
We'll get back to you. Thank you. Okay, the next David in our list here is immediately to my right, David Krupp. He's one of the founding members of Biking Brookline. He's a retired attorney who has lived and worked in New York, London, and Boston, and Brookline. And he commuted by bicycle during his working years, continues to get around the greater Boston area by bicycle. So David, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thanks to the League of Women Voters for sponsoring this forum this evening. I'd like to begin by thanking Commissioner Shute, Brian Kane, the chair of the Transportation Board, Amy Ingalls, to my left here, Transportation Administrator, our outstanding consultants, Ty and Bond, and also the Design Review Committee. I've been watching their work over the last 2 years, and it's been really impressive. I've gone to all the Design Review Committee meetings. They've had a really collaborative, open process, a lot of community feedback. They've done a lot of listening, and I think it's reflected in these documents. This plan does look different from what we saw 2 years ago, and that's because of the responsiveness of the consultants. I'd also like to thank Paul Warren of the Select Board for the comment he made at the last Design Review Committee meeting. He said that he was committed to having designated bike lanes along the entire length of the corridor. And he also committed to the business community that he would work with to address their concerns about parking. And I'm really encouraged that he's decided to be involved in this process, and I think it gives us a lot of reason for optimism that this project will in fact happen with all the benefits we're seeing. In terms of my reaction to the concept design presented, I guess my first reaction is I'm really glad Washington Street is going to be rebuilt, and although it's going to cost $28 million, the state and the federal government are going to be the ones paying for the construction, and that's a really important point, which I'll get to in a minute. I'm also really happy that this plan includes so many enhancements that are kind of complete streets enhancements that will make this a much more welcoming corridor for walkers, bicyclists, people using public transportation, and also for disabled people because of the ADA improvements. And I think it's important to remember that also is being paid for by the federal and state governments. And if we didn't have that funding, many of those things we would not have the funds for. And I think that's why it's really important at this stage that we come together as a community with a plan we can all agree on so we can get those benefits. In terms of the bicycling infrastructure, I think the key thing is that this plan includes protected bike lanes along the entire length of the corridor, and that's very important to us. And the reason is very simple. The data shows that the rate of crashes on protected bike lanes is much, much lower than even on the painted and so-called buffered bike lanes like the ones we have on Washington Street today. It's not only that the crash rate is lower, it's also the severity of the crashes tend to be much lower. The other key point is that transportation planners have done a lot of studies that show that there are actually lots of people who would like to get around by bicycle. They find it very appealing, but they will not ride on a road like Washington Street without protected bike lanes. And what all this really means is if we're really going to achieve mode shift to bicycling and other sustainable modes of transportation, and we do have that as a goal, the town, we really need to start having bike lanes like the ones we're seeing rolled out in Cambridge and Boston, where they're really getting good mode shift and lots more people bicycling. I mentioned climate change because, of course, that's important, but I also want to mention that there are a ton of other reasons why it's good for people to bicycle, and I think just the fact that that is the case is reflected in the 1,200 people who have signed the Biking Brookline petition asking for protected bike lanes on Washington Street. And it's not just the fact that they've signed, it's their comments. And I encourage you to go to the design website and look at our public comments, because we have 70 pages of comments from people talking about why they want protected bike lanes on Washington Street. And they're in very small print. There's a lot to read, but they all point to, some of them point to climate change, but many of them don't. It's simply, we don't have a car and we can't afford a car, or we don't have a car, but we don't want to have a car because even though we can afford it, it's a financial burden for us. Or we want our children to be able to bicycle to school, not only because that encourages healthy habits, but we hope that they'll be able to have more independence as they get older. Remember, this is probably the most important route in town for protected bike lanes. It connects Driscoll, Pierce, the high school, the library, the public health building, town hall. If we can't build protected bike lanes here, well, where? And if we can't do it now when we have $28 million being offered to us, when would we ever do it?
David, you're at 5 minutes. Thank you. So our third David in this lineup is David Gladstone from Brookline Bank. David is my banker for the small business that I own in Brookline, and he's very responsive to my calls now that I'm a customer. But even before I was a customer, David was always responsive to my outreach when I was chair of the Brookline Transportation Board and needing to engage with him and the business community in his role as the president of the chamber. So he's a past president of the chamber, deeply engaged with small businesses across Brookline, and just deeply engaged with the community. And we thank you for that, David. So welcome to the conversation. You have up to 5 minutes to weigh in.
Thank you. So I'm also a longtime resident out of South Brookline. I am the current board chair of the chamber, former president, but now I'm on the final route there as board chair.
Thank you.
And I'm also on the Small Business Development Committee. I've had a lot of conversations over the past number of months once the proposal came out on Complete Streets. First and foremost, the business community is for any type of multimodal transportation access to our business districts, including bikes. The business community, where the proposed bike lane will run through Washington Square all along Washington Street and down through the village, are extremely concerned and scared about the negative impact that will occur with the removal of so many parking spaces, as outlined during the open house, the design review committee meetings. The concern and fear relates to their livelihoods being impacted in a very negative way. The business owners also understand that there is a required trade-off of available spaces to be able to create a bike lane as proposed in the Complete Streets project. A few points: most bikers will utilize this lane to go from point A to point B as quickly as possible. Many users will be passing through and not stopping in either of the business districts. These districts that the cyclists will be passing through represent part of the fabric which we call Brookline. Many of these businesses are locally owned, locally run, which means any monies derived here from their livelihood stays in Brookline. Let's review the spaces going away for a minute. Along Washington Street towards Washington Square, the proposal, and it might have changed slightly, and I'm sorry if I'm giving inexact numbers, but it's sort of in this vicinity, was to reduce from 63 to 37 spaces. In the village end, it was to go from 46 spaces down to 28. Now, I know the review process came back, and I think they gave back like 8 or 9 spaces. Is that true, Aaron? Roughly? 9, okay. So, I mean, there has been some compromise. So there was a study that was done that found in the Washington Square that available parking usage outstripped supply by a factor of 2 times. In the village, the same study resulted in available parking usage outstripped supply by a factor of 3 times. If you ask any business owner in these areas, they agree that currently there isn't enough parking and that their customers, if they know where parking is, had to work very hard to find available spaces. In conversations with many business owners, they've stated that space is, if removed, need to be replaced. A parking study also needs to be done to truly understand the impact of removing so many spaces. The Complete Street project also boasts the positive economic impact to have a bike lane going through it. However, no proof to validate this suggestion has been put forward on this claim. We've also heard and read numerous reports from neighboring cities and towns who have already implemented and built complete street designs and projects that have many regrets. There have been fights between residents and business owners on who can use what spaces in the residential areas once spaces have been removed from business districts. Bike accidents, unlike what my counterpart here was saying, are on an upswing via perpendicular type of accidents, not parallel bike accidents where the lane is protected and the forward traffic is going this way, as is the bike. But where there's areas where there's a lot of curb cuts, a lot of driveways, a lot of areas to go in, the accidents are on the rise. We have all heard all of these things before, but bike accidents are on an upswing where protected bike lanes have been built because cyclists feel emboldened to increase their speed much faster as they pass through areas they are pedaling in. This has led to many perpendicular impacts, as I had stated, with cars and pedestrians, especially in areas with many curb cuts and discharge areas, as well as crosswalk intersections. This is also flagged as a concern by Monica Tibbetts, who's the Secretary of Transportation. I quote, "There are safety concerns cropping up on the new public bike throughways where the cyclist speeds have picked up as a result of being in a protected bike lane." I quote. That's the end of her quote. "This potentially poses situations that could turn deadly. Due to impact, Washington Street, as stated before, has numerous curb cuts. Bus stops will be discharging people into the bike lane as well as major intersections. Potentially, there can be these perpendicular impacts that I talk about. So let's be serious here. We also understand the desire to get the $29 million. Brookline needs a new road on Washington Street, but businesses need to be protected as well. So here are some of the things that businesses need. The town needs to undertake a complete parking study to understand the current usage inventory and what would happen with the reduction of spaces. Lost spaces need to be replaced close to the business district. Needs to be signage and wayfinding points indicating where additional parking is located. A commitment by the town to provide support during construction by setting up a liaison with dotted line to the town administrator to be able to rectify major issues which develop with construction. Also inferred here is much better communication on ongoing projects and construction lead times so that businesses know what to expect. Construction employees need to be shuttled in from satellite parking areas. The town should not, where requested, issue permits like in some places in the past. Any project not relating to the complete streets should also be treated the same way. Economic development needs to provide support and possible funding for businesses to relocate during heavy construction periods. After saying this, I will tell you I'm a bit skeptical, and let me explain why. There have been commitments made to business with other situations. Now, some of them might be able to be explained away because of COVID or because maybe the project stopped, but there were commitments made to businesses where we were gonna factor in like a business parking protection district, where we set up a committee. They were gonna be able to add money to a meter, and those monies were gonna be able to use for waypoint signing, for parking, for hardscape, softscape, and for additional trash pickups. Unfortunately, due to timing, and I think probably to COVID, that didn't happen. So that's one thing that was committed to businesses that didn't happen. The other thing that was committed to businesses was a parking study of what might be impacted by the senior project where there's going to be air rights. Now, that also might be on the back burner. Maybe that's why it hasn't happened, but there wasn't any communication back to small business with regards to what was going on.
David, you're at 5 minutes, so I'll ask you to conclude.
Okay, I have 10 more seconds?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So there has to be a just solution on accomplishing both things. The bike lobby is very vocal, they're very organized and driven, and they are outright very organized. To put it bluntly, I mean, you guys gathered in excess of 1,300 names. What was the total amount?
1,220.
Okay, okay.
But they keep going up every day. And all I need to do is ask somebody on a bicycle.
All right, we're not in the back and
Okay.
forth portion of the
Yep,
evening
thank
yet,
you.
so
Our small businesses, our concern is with our small businesses' survival, as locally owned entities are in the balance. Thank you for your attention, thank you for your time, and thank you for supporting our locally owned businesses in Brookline.
great. Thank you, David. So I want to stay with the three Davids here who all bring a really important perspective to this conversation, and I'm going to give you all the chance to respond to each other. But I want to also ask a question of you. As you think about the street that you think Washington Street could or should be, is there a model for that in Brookline or for the region that makes sense? And the answer to that question might be the street you have today is the street that you think should just be sort of reconstructed. But I'm curious if there's a street that you think is a good example or a model of what Washington Street could or should be. And so, David Krupp, I'll turn to you first and then turn to these two Davids.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a great question, and also one that would allow me to respond to some of the concerns that have been raised. There are a ton of streets like this in the Boston area. I mean, each street has, its own nuances, but for example, Beacon Street in Somerville has a sidewalk level bike lane next to a fairly narrow sidewalk through a commercial area. It works great. And I understand, change is hard and it's hard to visualize change, but I disagree, obviously, with much of what you said. I mean, first, of course, bicyclists shop. And to say that bicyclists don't shop, in my opinion, shows bad business judgment, because you're basically telling customers who come to your shops that you don't even see them. That's not good for business. Read the 1,200 comments where people talk about how they do their food shopping by bicycle. They pick up their children from school by bicycle. They go to work by bicycle. Second point, it is true that throughout the Boston area and really throughout the United States, every time bike infrastructure gets put in, there is a loud, vocal minority who don't like it. But let's be clear, the bike lanes in Cambridge are popular. The people who support them got reelected. The group of people who ran on a let's pull out the bike lanes platform lost. In Boston, Mayor Wu is rolling out the bike lanes. She's a pretty savvy politician. She's heard the loud voices, but she also knows that this is what the public wants. It's not a lobby. It's a group of residents who want to be able to enjoy the benefits of bicycling as a mode of transportation. In terms of the parking, the Bike in Brookline did its own assessment of the parking, and we compared it with the consultants. And basically, we're all seeing the same thing. The only reason why you're saying that the parking reduction is 50% or 60% is because you're very laser focused on one block. And you're assuming that if people can't park on that one block, they will not come to the business district. There are hundreds of parking spaces in Brookline Village, not just the 10 or 20 between Holden and Harvard Street. And when I say hundreds, they're really thousands. I'm only counting the ones that are available now. I think you are really selling Brookline short if you're telling us that people are going to decide that rather than go to Brookline Village, they'd rather go to a strip mall in Dedham because at least they know there they'll be able to park in front of the store. That, to me, reflects a lack of understanding about what makes Brookline special. And I'm all in favor of a parking study. I say bring it on, because I've seen all those empty parking spots right around the corner, and it would be so tragic for us to lose this opportunity because merchants believe that if someone can't park in front of their store, they're not going to come. And I would like to say, We do recognize curbside parking is important, and it's better than around the corner parking. But that's why communities that want complete streets manage the curb. They don't let people park at the curb for 2 hours. The curb is for half an hour. It's for a drop-off. It's more expensive than the meter around the corner. If we do the same thing, not only will we have better drop-offs, better opportunity for drop-offs, we will have better opportunity for drop-offs, even with the reduction in the number of parking spaces. Because right now, it's a first-come, first-served basis, and someone can come and park for 2 hours at a restaurant, and then prevent...
I'd like to have an opportunity to answer some of your questions.
So David Krupp, I'm going to stop you there. That was a little less than four minutes, and why don't we go to David Lashinsky first for up to 4 minutes in response to my question about a model street, and also anything you want to respond to that David Krupp just offered.
There's actually quite a few things I'd like to respond to, not just the model street, but also the notion that businesses themselves are opposed to bikers. That is the most patently ridiculous thing I've heard in my life. I am a business owner. Every business covets every customer that comes in, regardless of how they get there. The issue is whether or not they're able to get there in a way that allows them to shop and make use of the facilities, the restaurants and the theaters, without having to have, twist themselves out of, sorry, I'm being a little articulate here, but twist themselves out of shape to actually get there and park. I've done studies of my customers coming in, and I find that less than 8% of the customers that are coming in are bikers. Actually, no, I don't ask the question about biking. I ask the question, how did you come here today? Did you park or not? And if you didn't, did you use a bike? So I don't really care if they are a biker or they're not a biker. I just want to find out. What I found was that less than 7% actually came with a bike, number one. Number two, when I then looked at the numbers, most of the ones that came with a bike only went away with one item, and they typically went away with a small item and not a large item. So although you might be saying that, gee, in the aggregate, bikers go ahead and bring in a lot of business, in actuality, that does not hold up in looking at the actual data and experience of many of us, number one. Number two.
David, I'm going to ask you to just speak a little bit closer to the mic, because again, this is being recorded and it's important that we pick that up.
Okay. Number two, there are, in thinking about a street that is as complex as Washington Street, and thinking about the fact that we do have ambulances, we do have fire trucks, we have pedestrians, we have bicyclists. Number one, it would be great if everybody followed the rules. Too often I find that many of the folks that are there don't, and it's more dangerous for everyone. I can't think of a street in Brookline, actually, that is equivalent in terms of the throughput and the amount of traffic that goes through it. I can say that once the bike lanes were put into Cambridge, many of the businesses there went out of business, and there was a very much displeasure, not just by the business owners, but also by the residents, because all of a sudden their amenities and quality of life was diminished greatly by the fact that you now had either empty storefronts or chain stores that were coming in. I also don't see, the data that I have looked at regarding safety is much more in line with the data that David has commented on, which is that it is actually not safer with bike lanes. There are too many cutouts. There's too many things that are going on for this to be a safe environment, to have things that are hardscaped and separate. And on top of that, people can't move out of the way. You need flexibility.
Thank you, David. I'm going to give a couple minutes to David Gladstone to jump in here.
I'm going to answer your question first, since
Great.
you asked that question. With regards to a similar street, I'd hate to say it, but I've seen a complete street project in Newton, which is Hammond Pond Parkway. Beautiful. They changed it to 2 lanes. There's going to be a bike lane. There's going to be a pedestrian lane. There's no curb cuts. There's no buildings. There's no businesses. It's a win-win. They were able to do that. There was no opposition. There was no one losing. That's like a perfect world, and we don't have that. And I admitted that. And I'm not talking about spaces in front of businesses. If you heard what I said before, I made the comment that we need to make sure that whatever spaces are taken away are replaced. I didn't say that we need to keep all those spaces in front of the businesses, because the business community is realistic enough that we know that there's a lot of good reasons on why this project should go through. The town needs infrastructure. They need their infrastructure fixed. The town doesn't have $29 million to be able to do what they need to do, so it's a state and federal opportunity to do that. Now, at the end of the day, businesses are very supportive of bicyclists. I go around to all the business districts in Brookline as a business banker, okay? And no offense, but I don't see a ton of banks pulling up to a lot of businesses in any of the business districts I go to. I see some bikes, I see some people using the blue bikes, I see some of that happening, but if you really look around, I mean, I see people commuting back and forth to different places on where they're going from point A to point B, but I don't see a lot of bikes stopping in the business district. That's number two. Number three, businesses, local, they're locally owned, and the money stays in Brookline. If businesses can't do what they need to do, and they got slammed during COVID and they have not fully recovered. If anyone thinks they fully recovered, that's not the case, and they're teetering. Restaurants are teetering, their margins are compressed. A case of chicken went from $30 up to $120 over like a year period. And at the end of the day, they can't raise the prices as much as they need to because they'll price themselves out. And their employee, the cost of help is up. And with inflation and everything else that has occurred, there's a lot of insurance has gone up and all the different costs of the business have gone up. We're not against a bike lane. What I said before is I want to make sure that it's messaged back to the town that we need to replace these spaces we're going to take away.
Great, thank you, David. So we've got about 15 minutes left in tonight's conversation. You're getting a sense for the passion that folks have on this project from the three Davids here. I do want to invite members of the audience to come up and ask a question. So please do that at the front microphone here. It's important that we hear you on the mic because, again, this is being recorded and you will only get your voice picked up on the mic. I'm going to remind folks and ask folks, this is not a forum for public comment. There are many other opportunities. You've heard there's been 8 public meetings so far and many more to come. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is really information, not public comment. So I'm really going to ask you to ask a question. You can ask a question of any of the Davids here, of Amy, of the commissioner, of the consulting team. Any of them will be happy to answer. So if you can provide some direction in your question, that would be helpful. But please do ask a question rather than comment. Go ahead. Yes.
Okay, I'm Janet Gelbart. I'm a resident of Brookline. And I'm very involved with the senior community who are very concerned as pedestrians about the project. My question is, we hear a lot about bicyclists, and I don't think they scare me as much as the motorized things that go down the bike lanes. So I'm wondering what you're doing to address that, because Complete Streets was designed and all the pictures are bucolic of someone on a bicycle. But I don't see bicycles as much as I see scooters and motorized bikes, and they don't stop. So, and even motorcycles, although I'm told they're not real motorcycles because they're smaller engines, but to me they're essentially a motorcycle going down that same bike lane, which can also level with a sidewalk, come into the sidewalk. So how do you plan to address that?
Great.
Thank you.
So that is an excellent question. I'm going to direct that to the commissioner and to Amy. And if you want to defer to the consulting team, that's fine. But Commissioner, do you want to talk about that?
I do. I think that is a very good question. It's something new that we're actually grappling with. Right now, the e-bikes are permitted in the bike lanes. And so I'd like to hear from Amy or others, but I think we're really going to have to look at sort of what the rules are and how we sign it and how we convey how to use those bike lanes that we have.
Amy, is there more you want to add there?
Sure. Just, yeah, that it is a new issue and certainly not one that's unique to Brookline. All the communities around Boston and probably beyond are dealing with pretty much the same problem. Part of the issue is that there are so many varieties of types of vehicles that the regulations on them have just not caught up, essentially. And it's hard for our enforcement officers to figure out what they're looking at, basically, whether or not they belong. So the law needs to catch up, and I completely agree that it's a problem, but it's going to take some time to kind of parse through those things.
Great, thank you. Excellent question. Next question.
Yep. Hi, I'm Brian Hochleitner. I'm used to live on Washington Street, so not currently, but I use Washington Street pretty much all the time for walking and biking and driving. I guess my question really goes to the $29 million question, which has to do with my understanding is that there's this Massachusetts healthy transportation policy. And when I sort of Googled that, which gets dangerous doing Google research, it seems like it's actually an engineering directive about how some of the improvements for pedestrians, bicycles, and other users have to get incorporated into the project. And so I feel like there's a lot of discussion like we're either going to decide to get rid of the bike lanes or keep the bike lanes. But don't we really have to keep the bike lanes or lose the $29 million? That's my question. And if so, or should we really just be talking about how do we make the project better, keeping bike lanes, but make it better for businesses and everybody, which I think is what's been happening. So I'm just a little confused about, this discussion was framed as pro and con for the project, or I don't know what the pro and con is for. Is it for, do we want the 29 million, or should we just chuck it and throw up our hands and try to fund it? Or I guess I'm throwing a lot of questions around this, but I think it's a question about, how does that policy work in terms of the design and these improvements?
So I'm going to direct that to Rich and Chris from Ty and Bond, who are the folks that are interacting most with MassDOT, and not just on this project, but on other projects they work on across Massachusetts.
Many other projects, and it's a good question because that comes up all the time. And really, these projects are all about balance, right? And when we talk about healthy transportation, it's trying to balance all of those users, right? Now, if we don't do bike lanes, are they going to say you can't do the project? I mean, we're looking at all sorts of options. And again, the healthy transportation policy, and I commend you for looking that up. Not a lot of people would do that. But when you're looking at that, it's really how do we accommodate all those users to the greatest extent practicable, right? So that it all works together. It is a requirement that we look at all of these transportation modes. So throughout this project, we're looking at options along the entire corridor. How can we incorporate these things, accommodate all of the interests at the same time? And as I mentioned, this is all about balance. How do we balance all of these interests, all of these various roadway users? Will they take the money away if we don't do it? We don't, as designers and engineers, we don't look at that in that context. We look at it in the context of how can we make sure we're incorporating all of these alternatives to the best that we can to ensure that the business community can deal with it, the cyclists can deal with it, the pedestrians, all of those things that are in there. And by the way, Route 65 and Route 66 of the MBTA, they're weighing in on this as well because they want to make sure that we're not impacting transit users as well. So I hope I answered your question, but I don't think they're necessarily going to, I don't think, we don't look at it as like they're going to take the money away. We're looking at it, how can we explore various alternatives to make this work?
Right, I guess my question was just, isn't it a competitive process so that it's not like we don't have the money. We're trying to get the money. We're in line with 300 other communities across the Commonwealth. So if we don't comply with the directive and we say we still want the money, aren't they going to say next community?
So the thing with the Washington Street project is, while a lot of communities are competing for those funds, Brookline is programmed on the tip. So that money is programmed for Brookline, for Washington Street. And so what we're doing is we don't want the project to fall off the tip. So we're exploring various alternatives to ensure that the project stays there and we can accommodate it. Commissioner.
And I could add a little bit too here, I think. So we're sort of past the competitive phase for this project because the money is programmed. But we should be very clear here that MassDOT gets to decide whether this project goes ahead or not. There are many questions that the Transportation Board faces around where to put stop signs or how to allocate parking space. That is entirely a Brookline decision where the state does not weigh in whatsoever. That's not the case with this project. The Transportation Board will approve it, the Select Board will have a say, but MassDOT also has to approve it for it to move forward. Commissioner, anything you want to add?
I think I was just going to add, so at the 25% public hearing, when MassDOT will get everyone together and say, here's the plan and get the feedback, they want to know that this is the town's plan and why, and that we have done everything in our power to conform with their requirements and regulations. And then it goes through incredible rigorous review from MassDOT. And if they don't think that we have made every effort to comply, they can reject portions of it and send it back to us. So if we don't comply or don't demonstrate how we've evaluated every option, it's at risk, certainly of delay and being sent back to us to revisit.
Great, thank you. Next question from the audience.
Ann Lusk, this is a question for Amy and Aaron and the design team. It's a new question. Have you thought to design for the future and all of the senior bicyclists who are going to be riding 3-wheeled bicycles? Seniors are extremely fearful of falling because when you fall, it's negatively grave for the rest of your life. It impacts you in many ways. Seniors want to live forever. I do. They want to respond to climate change and their grandchildren. They might not be able to drive and get to the store, to the drugstore, to the post office, to the coffee shop, to their friend's house. And I know from doing the research right now, which is what I worked on all day today, there are a lot of new senior bicyclists. There's the bicycles. There's the Easy Rider that's a higher recumbent seat. There's the 2-seater Fun to Go, where you could have a person with Alzheimer's riding with a caregiver. There's the adult tricycle. There's an articulated bike that has 2 wheels that tip on the front. There's the old Christiania bike with the box in the front and the handlebar that goes this way. There are many more senior bicycles that are being designed. One was designed by a student at Delft University that is a smaller version of the Christiania cargo bike, and a senior could carry a pet in the front or groceries in the front. So be thinking of this, because with the level with sidewalk cycle track, that 3rd wheel, if it has to, goes on the outer edge of the sidewalk. It doesn't go into the sidewalk space, but it's not in the road. It's not hitting delineator posts. So,
And I think we got your question. Thank you. And
think about it.
in some ways, this is a similar question to the first question that was asked in terms of changes to the types of vehicles that we're seeing on our road. So, Amy, do you want to weigh in on this at all?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're with all the bike facilities that we're proposing, there is some variation as far as width is concerned, but we're staying within standards, and those standards do accommodate all different types of bicycles. And so I think where some of those decisions will be, some of that thought will be the most critical is at the intersections for like turning radii and stuff like that, which we're not really quite there yet as far as how the bikes, what the radius is for the bikes to get through. But that is something we'll keep in mind for sure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Yes. Good evening. My name is Susan Healy. I am on the Design Review Committee, and I believe we've come a long way. One thing with regard to the big parking issue, and my question comes to, when does a municipality, a town, a congested area make a decision, and at what point where we are at if we remove, we replace? I've been here for 25 years, give or take, and every year we lose a little parking. We lose a little parking, and that is normal. So now we're at this point. This is a big project. I believe we're losing over 80 spaces on the whole corridor, roughly. I keep changing, but it's in that number. So I guess my question to the panel would be, when do we remove that parking? Because somewhere along the line, this conversation became businesses against, bikers. And it's not about that. I would be standing here as a business owner for 24 years having this conversation if you said, we're taking biking away because we're going to do, a street fair every day. Like, it doesn't matter the reason why the parking is being removed. It's we need the parking. So when do we get into a zone of we're replacing now?
So good question. I am going to turn to the Davids for that question, and just have you ask each of you to weigh in. Let's try to keep to up to 1 minute in your responses, please. Just how the town should be thinking about trade-offs between parking and other needs for the streets. So I'll start with David Gladstone.
Thank you.
Up to 1 minute.
Thank you. 1 minute. Susan, you're a great business owner. You've owned your business a very long time. You've dealt with a lot of parking issues. You know how bad it is in the village. You know that there isn't like open spaces all over the place where people can come in, oh, I'm going to park here, I'm good to go, I'm going to go in and get my hair cut. It's a challenge. And the town has to come to the decision that they need to replace a lot of the spaces that are going to go away. We have no problem with spaces going away as long as they're replaced within the business district so that you can still do business.
Great, thank you. David Lashinsky.
Thank you. And it's a great question. There's a couple of different kinds of parking to think about. One is the transitory parking, somebody just stopping to run in, get something, and leave. And the second is, I want to go to the theater. I want to go out to the movies. I want to do a little bit of shopping and go to a few different places. So I agree completely with what David is saying about replacing parking. We need to really think about how our district is being utilized and the kinds of businesses that are here and how they can best be nurtured with the customers that are supporting it now and will be supporting it hopefully in the future.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. David Krupp, up to a minute.
Yeah, sure. So I think that there's a ton of parking in both locations, Washington Square and Brookline Village, that could be made available to customers. And I was actually very encouraged, even though I disagreed with everything else you said. I was very encouraged when you said that, you know, if you replace parking, then we're okay with it. And I wish that conversation were going on, because Biking Brookline has been saying this for months, that look, the library garage, it's half empty. Many people don't even know it exists. It's just like a block away from Brookline Village. Why isn't that made available? Why is it that we spend all this money on overrides to build schools with parking lots, but on the weekend those parking lots sit vacant? Why can't we take advantage of that? So yeah, we think it's a great idea, and but I want to say that if that really is the case, that your only concern is parking replacement, then we should really be able to go home right now, because we're finished. We've got the bike lanes, you've got the parking in the library, we've got the $28 million. What else are we talking
Chris, I want to
about?
add one point here.
We're at a minute. You were under a minute, so I'm going to give you 15
10 seconds.
seconds.
10 seconds. Thank you.
15 seconds.
So appreciate that. How would I put this? There's a parking study going on in Coolidge Corner that's being used via ARPA funds, and I'm involved with that. We're trying to come up with creative ways to do right with parking. The theater just opened up their addition, and it allows 200 more people.
Yes.
That parking has to go someplace. It's a zero-sum game. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so here's where we are in the evening, folks. We're at 8:30, and that is the scheduled ending time. I want to, if with the permission of the league, I'm looking for Felina to nod her head a little bit. I want to just go a little bit more into the evening, and I want to take two more questions from the audience. So the folks beyond those two, you can sit back down. I'm sorry we're not going to get to you tonight, but we welcome your further engagement in this project. So two more folks that will direct to members of the panel, and then we'll wrap up with thank yous and acknowledgments.
Thank you. I'll try to use my time well, but I'm going to ask both questions, Perry. No, I'm kidding. I want to ask about information dissemination, distribution, discussion. I'm not sure who this is directed at, but except it's the town, not the consultants, because what I want to think about are the things that exceed the consultant's remit, which is the 60 feet of pavement. And there are two dimensions of that, one of which I don't need to say much more about because it's parking. Whereby they've worked very hard in terms of figuring out the parking possibilities within that corridor. But as has been pointed out, most of the parking in Brookline Village and Washington Square is not right on Washington Street. And so we're hearing bits and pieces of information. And so my question is, how do we become informed about the possibilities, both in terms of the quantity of parking, the availability, the things like timing and metering and all of that. And the second thing I want to ask about information about is about the bigger question of the economic health of businesses. Again, there's been information thrown around. I don't know, it's not efficiently, not systematically distributed. I have, for example, seen references and made references to a bunch of studies that show that complete streets projects either benefit or are neutral to businesses in those corridors in a lot of places. There may be equally good studies to the contrary. I would love to see them if they exist, but there's been no systematic way of distributing them, as far as I can tell, in terms of our discussion process. How can we distribute and share and discuss that information?
Great, thank you. So here's how I want to handle that. Let's have the commissioner and Amy answer however they want on the public information and process question. Then I'm going to turn to the three Davids again, and I'm going to ask them to respond to both points. So I'll ask you, how can the town better engage your constituencies and the people that you think matter in this conversation? And then also, if you want to share a quick data point that you have in response to the question about studies and impacts on business, we'd love for you to share that too. And again, I'll ask you to keep it to a minute for the combined answer there. But first, let's hear from the town on public information.
All right, thank you very much. So we have multiple ways that we have been communicating about the project. So, whether it's been press releases or town meeting members, on the website, our portal also, if you put your email in, you get notified of every meeting that we have on the project. So just to know that's a resource that's available. With the Coolidge, you talked specifically about parking studies. So the Coolidge Corner parking study is underway. It involved the businesses, public outreach. And following that, we're looking to do the same thing for Brookline Village. So this wouldn't be just the Washington Street corridor, but the larger the larger expanse of the village overall, and to do that analysis. And so we would be doing the same thing, having the same type of public outreach, and that would be going on in parallel to this. So
great, thank you. So I'll turn to David Glasson. Do you want to weigh in first here on both of these points, public information and engagement, and then also anything you want to share about studies or data that you've seen on these issues?
Sure.
Up to 1 minute.
Okay, thank you. So with regards to how the town can effectively engage with businesses, they can leverage the chamber, the CCMA, they can leverage the Small Business Development Committee, and they can leverage, we have, like, Paul Warren has been going around talking to small businesses, asking them what would work. I mean, we're having engaging conversations, but it's a two-way street here. There's give and take, and it isn't one side wins, the other one loses. We have to all win together. And I mean, there's a whole plethora of data which has come out. We got some from Cambridge, we got some from newspaper articles, and in one newspaper article right here, bike pedestrian crashes flagged emerging threat as bike lanes expand. That's in the front of a newspaper article. So I'm not making this stuff up, and I'm not trying to inflame the bike lobby. Like I said, you guys are very organized, you're very vocal, you get people out to the meetings, but at the end of the day, you're not the only constituency here. There's also the elderly, there's people, there's business people, and we all have to try to figure out a solution together.
Great, that's 1 minute. David Lashinsky.
Thank you. So I think David addressed the business side. I want to talk a little bit about the residents. Most of the people that live on Washington Street are still unaware of the project. They don't know about what's going on. They don't know that the quality of life is going to be severely impacted. They don't know that they're going to no longer be able to get deliveries, furniture deliveries, move easily, deal with trash pickups, all of the other myriad of things that happens, that it's going to be a much more fraught area to now try and navigate through. How best to reach them? We lost the tab. Almost everyone I know used to read the tab. So I'm thinking it's going to be something you have to go almost door to door, maybe put out some flyers, actually try and reach the different constituencies. Does the town know, out of curiosity, how many people live on Washington Street right now? I mean, that's a question. Like, how many people are we talking about here?
yeah, I mean, I don't have that number on the tip of my brain, but we actually hand delivered and did mailings on every single meeting that we've had. So we touched all of those properties, and it wasn't just those sort of front facing on Washington. It was going into the connecting streets as well. So we have every single meeting there was a mailing or hand delivery that went to the abutters.
Great. So David, final thoughts here, and we'll turn to the last David.
Final thoughts is it's not working. Because everyone I talk with about this says, oh, they're not aware of it. They have not heard about what's happening here. So I know there has been effort that is going on, but it's just not working. So I think we need to find another way of reaching them.
Thank you. David Krupp, up to a minute.
Yeah, sure. In terms of studies, we're kind of late in coming to the party for Complete Streets projects. There have been projects implemented all over the United States and Canada, and most transportation departments want to do an assessment of how things work, plus economic development departments. So there are a ton of studies that assess how these projects impacted business. And there's so many. You can now read an article in a professional journal basically summarizing 23 such projects, and basically concluded that these had little or no impact on business, but when they did, it tended to increase business activity. The other point, both of the Davids here, not me, the other two, have said, and people don't come to our stores. Well, of course, by bicycle, well, of course not, because you keep preventing us from having a bicycle network. Where they are going to stores is in Cambridge, where 30% of the people now on Hampshire are on bicycle because they put in a protected bike lane. And so, yes, we need to get this information out there. Biking Brookline will be putting all this stuff on our website. Our parking study that shows the wide availability of parking in Brookline Village and Washington Square, the numerous reports that show no impact on business, or if anything favorable. The studies that show a huge increase in the number of people bicycling once you put in this type of protected network.
David, I'm going to stop you there. Thank you. Okay, so our last question from the audience, and then we'll do thank yous and acknowledgments.
Yeah, thank you all very much for this discussion. I'm Perry Grossman. I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 5, and I'm on the advisory committee. I wanted to know how this project would affect cars that park in driveways that are crossing the sidewalks. I don't know, Amy or anyone else might want to speak to that.
Amy, and also the consulting team may want to step in on that question as well. But Amy, do you want to start?
Yeah, so since we are working from the back of sidewalk to back of sidewalk, the sidewalks, the beginning of the sidewalk more or less, as it pertains to where the driveway is, isn't going to change. So I think those will not be impacted and certainly not made worse.
Consulting team, is there more you want to add?
So are you talking about during construction or just after construction? After construction. Okay, so some of these things are local issues. People shouldn't be parking on the sidewalk, for example. One of the other hats I wear is I live in Beverly, and I'm the chairman of the Parking and Traffic Commission. And so these things are usually in front of us. So some of these things are enforcement issues, right? People shouldn't be parking on the sidewalk. This project will not affect anyone's driveway. Now, I do want to go back to the middle, David, because he mentioned something about, well, how's the sidewalk going to blend with the driveways and all that sort of thing. As part of this project, work may extend into somebody's property to do just that, to make sure that the new sidewalk blends with someone else's driveway so there isn't that bump going into the driveway. So all of these things are part of the project. I know there was also a discussion about traffic. We don't really talk about a lot of traffic. I can assure you that on a project like this, with Mass DOT reviewing it, they're not going to spend $29 million and have gridlock on Washington Street. We didn't necessarily mention it because we know some of these other things are important to the community, like pedestrians, like bikes, like transit. But I can assure you this project is a transportation project as well as it's a complete streets project. Traffic signals, things like that. You heard Chris mention all state-of-the-art technology. Level of service is what we use to gauge the operation of an intersection. All of those things have to work, and MassDOT will be raise a focus on making sure that happens. They're not going to invest all this money and then say, ooh, well, now we can't get down Washington Street because traffic's at a gridlock. Things like buses, that was another comment that was made. Transit signal priority, things like that will be incorporated into the project so that buses aren't necessarily blocking the street so people can't get by. So all of those things, and you may have, if at some of the other meetings you may have heard me mention, this project is an 800-step project. We're on step 12. You know what I mean? We have a long way to go. So I hope that helped.
Yeah, thank you, Rich. So that's going to conclude our program tonight. Really appreciate all of you who are in the audience, and I want to ask you to applaud, but hold your applause to the end as I just run through a list of thank yous here. I want to thank, of course, the League of Women Voters and Felina, Diana, and Ernie, who helped put this together, an absolutely essential institution in Brookline. So thank you for all that you do. I want to thank Brookline Interactive Group for recording this, and you'll be able to watch the recording from home if you'd like. I want to thank the town's administrative and custodial staff for making available this room and for helping make sure that we're all safe and that this room is cleaned afterwards. So thank you very much. And then thank you to all of the panelists. That includes town staff who are here away from their families to participate in tonight's discussion, the consulting team away from their families, and the panelists, including the three Davids, who I think really brought passion and good information to tonight's conversation, and I want to thank them for their civic
Chris,
engagement.
we want to thank you too.
Happy to do it. It's fun to sit in Bernard's chair, for a night. So thank you, everybody, and we look forward to continuing this conversation.